Egalitarianism is a pipe dream. Men and women are not equal. The patriarchy values women for being women, and stands ready to assist her return to reality.
Okay, philosopher.
So you believe in equity. I'm not really sure what...
So I explained it because you were gone.
Yeah,
so
I was dealing with some
traditional feminism to me means, the suffrage. Women should vote and contribute to society, right? And all jobs pretty much exist to support the traditional feminist role, which means having children, raising a family.
That's not a feminist.
Yeah, a modern feminist is very different. It's more of like a hate men stance and posture.
I mean, it's always been that way, but...
No, it hasn't. The original feminists that fought for, voters' rights and for women to not be treated as property did not come from an angle of we hate men. Came from an angle of I am human too, just like, black people when they were in slavery, right? And things like that. I mean, I don't think there's a difference there. Women couldn't even sign a lease on their own with their own credit for like over 50 years ago or 100. Okay.
Fake news.
So it's not fake news because
fake news.
It's legal. It's in our history books. It's
what
law.
What if I told you, do you know the NWO, not the NWO, that's something else. The National Organization for Women now? You familiar with it? So this is one like the early leading feminist organizations. Feminism has always been against the nuclear family, breaking up families. It's actually one of the stated goals of feminism. It's this idea that traditional feminism was all for women being like having families. No, feminism has always been, at least one of its attempts has been to destroy the family. And it's been quite successful at it.
I think that's a blanket statement again, and I think that we have like a mix of the population of what traditional feminism started as. It may have been a small few of leaders that had different ideas and ideologies, but in the grand scheme of things, the women that did mobilize and fight for rights came from a very different place of I don't want my daughter to live in a world where she feels oppressed and she doesn't get paid equally but might work twice as hard in the workforce or things like that. Like if we're going to ask women to bring a second income in the household or something, shouldn't they be compensated for the same amount of work that they're doing too, and the fact that they have other responsibilities at home as well? But back to my point, traditional feminism came to fruition as a movement of like, we don't want our daughters to be property. We want our daughters to be daughters.
Never the case.
In God's eyes, there is no woman, there
property.
is no man in God's
Women
eyes.
have
That's what the
never been
Bible
property.
says.
I think the
They
whole
have been
women
considered property.
Women were property
property.
back in the day. Like
Yeah, they were.
Like in the
No.
1800s.
Yes, they were.
They were
In the
property.
1800s, women were property. Okay.
Well,
Yeah.
I think
You don't know that?
Read Pride and
Women
Prejudice.
were legally property, so you could buy
Yes.
a woman.
No, not that sense. But
We
if
can
you,
talk about slavery. That's something else. You could buy a man. You could buy
A
a
woman could not go and do anything without
Not true.
permission from her husband.
If she
not
was
true.
married back
She
in
was-
the day,
No, it's okay.
No, if she was married back in the day, any money that she would earn would belong to her husband, and her children would belong to her husband. So if she were to try and get divorced from him, they would be his property. They'd be his kids. She couldn't fight
That
them.
wouldn't make a woman the property of the husband.
It
Even if
wouldn't-
that is
okay,
true,
it
it wouldn't
wouldn't-
make
I'm sorry.
them the property.
I feel like it would in every.
Grid 1 Motorsports donated $200. You have been lied to. Women could always own property. A woman was elected mayor in 1877. You need to read a book and learn the real history. Return to the patriarchy. We will enlighten you.
Yeah, so I agree with Grid 1. The history of women would heavily disagree with what feminists push right now. Feminists love to push this idea that women have suffered throughout history, where in fact, when the feminist agenda was being pushed, the vast majority of women pushed fanatically against it. And the people that were actually pushing this feminist agenda were large corporations and lobbyists. Because, hey, if I can give equality to women as well as men, now, and they have a vote, they can get in the workforce, all of a sudden, I have twice as many people I can start taxing, twice as many people I can start getting all of their money from. has never been an altruistic, hey, this is just better for the world. That's what they peddled. That's what they said. That's what they promoted. But secretly, that's never been the ideal of feminism. And most women had pushed against it at the time. But most women didn't have the voice that major corporations and major people in government did.
But I think the whole push for it was that at some point, like, especially later in feminism, it's because like women lost the trust that they should have had in the men around them to provide and protect for them. Like a lot of people talk about now, like, I don't want to rely on a man for our income, for our family. Like if he leaves me, then what am I going to do? I'll have no education and nothing to rely on. But I think like what you're saying about how feminism like has tried to destroy the nuclear family is true, because essentially you would have a man who would be a provider and protector and who would protect that woman. She wouldn't have to feel the need to fight against that for her own freedom, because she would have faith in her husband to care for her properly and care for her family properly and provide for them.
Well, just historically speaking, it's not accurate. Like I said, feminists love to paint a history where women were dumb, they were property, they were traded. It's just not true. Women were overwhelmingly happy with the arrangement.
But
they
that's
were
what I'm
also
saying.
extreme.
I would. That's a stretch.
No,
that's
no,
a bit
historically
of a stretch.
accurate.
No, because women at 14 years old were being sent off to marry men that were much older than them, even as children. So let's not like talk about like how happy women were. If you like, I come from a very, very conservative background, very traditional background. Okay, there's a lot of religious indoctrination, a lot of cultural conditioning, a lot of stuff that happens out in the world. It's not just like in America. America's a very free society, and
Okay.
yes, I understand feminism gets thrown around
Before you pull the
everywhere.
world card, like I'm not ignorant to what's happened around the world or what happens around the world. Actually, women in other countries are generally way more happy in their marriages than women in the U.S. I lived in a
Yes.
foreign country for all of high school. I've met people like that. I've met people who, hey, it was an arranged marriage. At first, I didn't know this person, but because the constraints on marriage are so tight in most other countries, you're forced to be in that the hot pot where you have to work on things, because you cannot break this. It is that covenant. But eventually you come out the other side and those two people love each other. And generally speaking, that's what happens. And generally speaking, it is because the man will provide for the family and it frees up the woman to do what she wants to do, which is raise, teach. Because women, generally speaking, in history, were very intelligent, taught their children, because I think it's the education of colonial day children was probably equivalent to college right now.
Probably to a master's degree, their vocabulary. But that's
Yeah.
also the literature that was being put out, the things that people were reading, the way people were talking. You've got to like take the whole like picture
know.
with it. They had tutors. They had a lot of
in
different things.
a society that was run by men.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
operated by women too. Like
Yeah,
that's
like
the
I'm
whole that's
saying,
the whole dialogue we need
because
to be having.
the women really enjoyed
Patriarchy
that.
didn't just do everything. Yes, they provided opportunity and did a lot of the brute
No.
force work, but then women also executed.
I'm
They
not
were the
saying
ones
that
at
women
home
did
that were
nothing.
doing things.
I didn't say women did nothing. They
Right,
were
and I
very
didn't say you did.
traditionally, they were extremely happy with the role that they were given, where they were the housewife, the stay-at-home mom, the teacher, the one who nurtured all the children. They were intelligent. They had to be, because they had to teach their children. Whereas nowadays, women can just pawn off their children to the government and say, hey, please teach my child. And
How can a woman teach their children though if they don't have an education? Which is kind of like the conversation
Well, okay,
we were
so
having, which
if
I
we're-
wanted to have a little, you know.
Well, education nowadays holds very little weight. I know specifically in the corporate world, when I was an engineer, like most of the having a degree as an engineer is important, but for most other jobs, experience is king. They do not care if you have a degree.
Right, but you're
More and
talking
more
about
in the
women
world.
teaching and child rearing and educating children.
Well,
Don't they need an education themselves
No,
as well, so
they don't
they
need
can
a
actually do
formal
that?
education.
And
How are you
They
going to learn if you don't get the
to
education?
get a formal education? See, this is
like
another
like
thing.
homeschooling.
This is
Yeah.
another thing that the
I've
government
homeschooled all 5
has-
of my kids
I mean,
until this past year.
so-
If anybody understands what it means to actually homeschool kids and have an education versus not have an education, I'm probably the most qualified one at the table.
Final thoughts
to talk
from
about it.
both of you on this?
No,
Go
yeah,
ahead.
this is just it's
It's debatable, I think, at best.
Don't show
no,
that.
it's
Don't
not
show it.
debatable.
Yeah.
Because no, our modern
Well, why would
education
you
is
fucking-
vastly inferior compared to what we had in the past. When we didn't have government supplied education, people were way more intelligent. It's
In
almost
many
like
different,
it's
areas.
almost like people in power want people under them to be dumber.
Well, of course they do.
So that
Yeah,
they
of
can't
course
be
they do.
challenged.
The literacy rate alone is like horrific, and and it's
So,
just getting worse. So
exactly.
you don't
So-
need a formal education in a school, in the public school system, or a college degree. My sister is.
I think a formal
stay-at-home
education
mother.
is
She
way
homeschools.
overrated.
It is, and what kids are being taught in school these days
Yeah.
has very little to do with a proper education, and certainly they don't have the life skills that they should have to function in society. You know, how to manage their money, how to cook or like sew something, like these
Well,
skills that you could
yeah,
use, or
it's
how to work on a car,
all of
like
those tangible
practical.
skills. It's logic. It's all of those
Yeah.
things that used to be taught to children,
Yes.
but are no longer anymore because it's not expedient.
I
by
saw
the
a
powers that
video
be.
of this little farmer boy, and he was like spreading seed, and he knew all about the tractors, and he was so well educated. And like that education, he was so young, but he knew so much about farming, more than I could ever hope to learn. And that education comes from his parents, and that's what I'm
But-
saying. Like you
yeah.
can provide a
Well,
good
so
education.
This is the point we're at right now with education, with the state of the nuclear family. All of these things have been affected dramatically by the input of a feminist agenda in our society.
Yes.
I'm not saying it's the only thing, but a major contributing factor is pulling women out of the house
Yes.
and saying, okay, now women don't have this job anymore. All of a sudden, someone needs to take care of those children. Let's send them off to Caesar.
Yeah.
And we wonder why they come back looking like Romans. Yeah. I mean, obviously, you guys can probably tell I'm not a feminist. But,
Really?
yeah, I know, very surprising.
Hard to tell.
But yeah, I think if you do your own research into the history of just humanity in general, yeah, men are stronger than women, and therefore probably have a more possibility to commit atrocities. But generally speaking, men in the past valued women. They valued their job immensely, and they fought, died, and provided so that their
Yes.
women could have that coveted job. Because men were built to do that. They love doing that. That's patriarchy. And patriarchy, in its purest form, protects those women that are under their care.
But just like there's a fine line between being a woman empowerment traditional feminist, as I like to call it, versus a modern feminist, there's also a fine line between being a part of the patriarch and founding fathers and protecting women and children and the vulnerable population versus like misogyny. There's like just a fine line that people are towing now in our modern society, day in and day out.
Yeah,
like
but
men and women.
And throughout history, those misogynists, those people who abused that system, were far littler. And then we see with the feminist agenda infecting the women in our society and men in our society.
I don't know if it's far littler. I think maybe that's debatable too.
Yeah.
But
Well, I think just historically accurate. Because, I mean, you see when feminism has been injected into our society, all of these negative things have come about. Whether you want to say that first wave feminism was a great thing, it has led us to where we are right now.
Yes.
So we can't discount that feminism, when it was introduced, has led us to where we are right
Well,
now.
feminism is all about women seeking independence from men to have agency and
Yeah.
control over their own lives. That does not do well to contribute to the nuclear family, right? Like, as soon as you have that, you have a woman who's not being submissive to her husband, not trusting him to lead. And it's funny, like, for years, my brother would say, I know this nice guy, I know that. And it's like, I don't want a nice guy. And I realized like I was seeking somebody that could lead, somebody I could submit to. I just didn't know how to put it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I agree. I think, and I think there's a purpose to attacking the nuclear family. And I think there's a purpose to like trying to make us all dumber. And it's so we're easier to control.
All right, moving things along.